All right, excellent. It's working. Cool outfit, by the way. And what's that there? That drawing is just like part of a
This is the
Rorschach test.
this was a screen printing of a actually yeah, it was a wheel that was photographed, and the cool thing about the screen print was that the frame that I screen printed, if I remember correctly, I put the emulsion on the frame like 6 months after I tried to burn this image onto the frame, so that explains why it's like so thinly washed.
Okay, yeah.
But yeah, I love screen printing. I don't do it myself, but I have a friend who's into that stuff. And then on the back, I think are the lyrics to the song "Funny Face" by the Muffs.
Oh, interesting. I don't think I've heard of that before. Actually, I was interested looking up the things that you recommended me, namely the not just, of course, the Wendy Carlos album, which I'd heard a bit of before, but also um, the Bruckner Problem for one thing, and the Zaireeka album by the Flaming Lips. These are pretty interesting concepts, and to a degree, I've toyed with a bit of them myself, and I've even found them interesting in other artists who I've heard, who I'll probably get to as time goes on.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's kind of why I wanted to have this meeting because I wanted to talk to you about like I mean to me something like Zaireeka is something where it's an album that is conducive to that's weird. Sorry, weird difficulty because I'm starting a meet. Sorry, I was like starting a meeting that I thought I had already started. But anyway, yeah, I would think that Zaireeka, something like Zaireeka, where it's 4 CDs and it's up to, and the listener is actually also a composer because the listener has, the listener is interacting with the music in a very there's a very active engagement that is happening. Um, the listener is it's not just like they can turn they can twiddle a knob, but they can twiddle one of the CDs. So it's almost like they're mixing as they're listening, and they kind of have they have the freedom to turn up one CD at will. It's there's not the same degree of I would say deference. The listener is not passively listening. But the listener is actively engaging with the music, which, and I mean that seemed like something that would be aligned with kind of your approach to Saint Anger.
Right. Yeah. I really like that idea with Zaireeka, in part because, of course, we tend to experience these musical releases linearly, or at least that's what we're supposed to do. And with this sort of thing, it kind of opens up different ranges of subjective experiences for people. Of course, to a degree, we all experience different works or pieces of art subjectively, where we might be technically hearing the same thing, but put our own projections on it to it, so it's as if we're listening to different things. But Zaireeka, at least in concept, having not even yet listened to the record, which I intend to do, it really seems to take that to the next level, in the sense that you can listen to these different layers in whatever order, and that even just that initial order in which you listen to them, or I guess degree of layering in which you choose to listen to them, whether it be all four at once or just one or just two, etc., can really color your interpretation of the record going forward. So I like that idea, and it in a way it seems to kind of presage what will become more over time, kind of the Plunder Phonics, the remixing of different layers, and certainly when Guitar Hero multi-tracks came out, that opened the floodgates for a lot of people.
Yeah, that was really like so much stuff that I so much stuff that I think people wanted to sample became sampleable once the Guitar Hero multitracks happened. And mashup was also, I would also think that around, because I mean, I think mashup is also very much aligned with that type of plundering. You know, because I mean, well, or it's a,
what was that? We lost connection a little bit.
that relies on that encourages plundering, because you know the mashup composer. Oh, ooh, my internet connection is unstable. Let me try another room.
Okay, there we are.
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would. I mean, one of my favorite mashups is it's called This Charming Video Game. It's a mashup of the This Charming Man by the Smiths and Video Games by Lana Del Rey. It's yeah, and it's the instrumental backing track of Video Games with an isolated Morrissey vocal. A lot of the, you know, and I think a lot of these mashups would have been really, really difficult to do before music editing software became commonplace. There's which is not to say that it wasn't, which is not to say that there weren't people who did plunder and had to do the labor of razor blades and Scotch tape and that kind of, or actually like Mylar tape. Splicing tape is. May I ask, anecdotally, have you ever actually spliced tape, like reel-to-reel tape?
I actually haven't. I haven't really done it, at least in any musical context. I remember even back in the day, I did have a cassette recorder, and I would often record myself and my friends talking or whatever, acting like we were DJs of some sort or like. And sometimes I would accidentally find, you know, certain sounds that you could get by, you know, holding a button while you press record or what have you. And sometimes I would try to recreate that. You know, it's pretty interesting editing stuff together that way. So I guess in retrospect, the editing bug, as it were, was in me for a long time. But yeah, I haven't actually spliced stuff together on cassette for music.
Right.
And I imagine it's pretty laborious, and it can be easy to forget that. But I definitely remember listening to the first few albums by Noi, the so-called krautrock band.
Yes.
And they definitely had some of that. In fact, I think one track of theirs called Cassetto was literally just the sound of them feeding some kind of session they had into a tape, or what was it, like a tape eater or something? It's that they somehow got the recording effect of it, and it sounded kind of ethereal in a way, even as this recording is basically being destroyed.
That's a tape eater. I mean, what I think you're describing sounds a lot like certain tape delays. You know, I mean, there are definitely delay pedals, and there are many different ways to create delay. But I think, if I remember correctly, Binson, the hardware, the Binson Echo Rec, that unit is actually a tape delay unit where it records something onto tape and then feeds that tape. Essentially, what I think it does is it disables the erase head. Sorry, because that's a little bit tricky for me to understand. I know that the tape heads are the transducers that were the head, and it's but yeah, but anyway, a tape eater, which and I would love to talk about Noi because they did do a lot of really interesting tape manipulations, incorporating them into the project. But yeah, I think a tape eater or a time lag accumulator. That is what I'm thinking of. Yeah, I think I know that one of my professors wrote a piece called Micro Electro Echo, which utilized a time lag accumulator. And I think that this is a, let me see if I can find any quick explanation of what this is. This is an interesting article. The Complete Birth of the Loop, Terry Riley in Paris, 1962 to 63. And I'm very much aware that there are currently, and I'm sure you're aware of this, many pieces of hardware are now emulated digitally.
Right. Yeah.
So I think there may indeed be some emulators of time lag accumulators. But what I think the basic premise is because yeah, right now I went to Google and I quoted time lag accumulator and I set a filter site.edu. So there's 43 results for that. But when I remove the filter, there's something about the time lag Pauline Oliveros used the time lag accumulator, and Terry Riley used it in Poppy No Good and the Phantom Band. It is a musical system that messes with time. Every note you play is repeated over and over every few seconds until it gradually fades out. It was originally a system made out of two reel-to-reel tape recorders. You would record your music on recorder A, then play it back immediately on recorder B, feeding the output of B back to A. That sounds a lot like what you're talking about with Noi using a tape eater, where it's a destructive thing.
Yeah, you've re-piqued my interest in this sort of stuff. I guess the cassette technology and how it was used for recordings. I'd like to read more about that in my own time. I wrote that down. But yeah, I'm actually reminded. Have you heard of the band Bowl of Heaven?
I've heard of them. I think that they're the only thing. I think that if I remember correctly, they're a band that is like really interested in conceptual art and like creating albums that are almost that really stretch the idea of the album. But I don't know much about them.
Yeah, I just thought about them because they made heavy use of the kind of techniques that you mentioned and had actually recorded many of their pieces on audiobooks on tape. But what's, I guess, the most immediately notable thing about them is that they've broken records for the most volume of music or more broadly sound recording ever made. So they have pieces that through, procedural generation and the like have reached like upwards of 8 septillion years long, like several times the known length of the universe so far, and having thousands of releases that average at least an hour in length, if not much more. And of course, out of all that discography, not all of it's going to be golden, but there is several hidden golden nuggets amidst all the rather abstract noise. And I've always been fascinated by that, just those sorts of experiences where it's very vast and there's a huge diversity of sounds or experiences to have.
Yeah. That's especially interesting to me because even though I have a very limited knowledge of coding, it does not seem at all implausible to me that somebody could program some sort of command to digitally generate music from, or to digitally output music, there could be self-eating computer viruses. And then, so I mean, so for something to be 8 septillion years long, it might seem impossible. And I'm sure that by entirely human means, it would be impossible to create something that the length of which automatically exceeds the human lifespan. But a piece of code could just keep, like, it could be a recursive function where it just keeps stretching over and over again. For instance, you could take one piece of music and then feed it into some sort of algorithm where it's just stretching upon itself. And then I'm not, and that's actually speculative, because I don't know if that's exactly how Bull of Heaven has been able to achieve these world record breaking feats of volumes of music.
Yeah, that's certainly part of it. I think it varies from piece to piece. And actually, to the point about conceptual art, they actually have many pieces that are basically puzzle pieces, in that in order to open them, to listen to them, you have to follow different procedures. And sometimes it involves knowledge of compression formats and how to deal with them. Some of them aren't even, in a way, meant to be accessed at all. And some of them are actually of negative duration, which I don't know exactly how that works, but there's entire little subsets of fans on the internet, particularly to rate your music, who will break down and share with other people what they found out about stuff like this, how to open the files, or how they achieved certain feats like we've mentioned, or even the origins of their titles, which are often taken from obscure texts and such. So that in itself becomes its own kind of experience of, like, this Easter egg hunt of what this means, or what its connection is to that, or little series of pieces that's based in the mathematical concept of cardinality and how it's generated, just stuff like that.
Yeah.
So suffice it to say, I'm just always interested in experiences, whether they pertain to music or otherwise, that are just kind of out on the fringes that way.
Oh yeah. I would say that I share your enthusiasm for that kind of the fringe, the margin, but getting back to Plunder Phonics, correct me if I'm wrong, was that a term coined by John Oswald?
I'm actually not sure. It's just something I encountered at one point over the past 10 years, and I just understood it to involve taking pieces of already recorded music and manipulating, splicing them together, or what have you, to create something totally new. And thinking about it, it's interesting because, to a degree, you can make a totally original composition out of extant recordings, because all you really need is a hit, basically. And maybe it could be a big open, ring of, say, in a rock band context, a guitar with cymbals, or perhaps you could use effects like reverb to more or less simulate it. But in a way, that would theoretically solve the problem of production. I mean, admittedly, I'm not the most sophisticated person production-wise, and that I tend to follow the approach of, well, if you can hear it and the content itself is good, then it's done, which has its upside of efficiency and downside of it being generally less accessible in that way. But ideally, you could take something that was already very well produced, and it may not even be about the actual recording itself and what it might mean to people. You could just find these little snippets that become the building blocks for a whole new piece. And it sounds clear because it was based on something that was actually labored over time, but it's something completely different at the end. I'm interested in that idea. I haven't really approached it myself, but it's something that's occurred to me more often as I've really gone down the rabbit hole of editing material together to create compositions. They're often based on improvisations, often recorded just onto my computer microphone, of myself on the Casio, or me with other friends, things like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've edited for a long time, and it took me a long time to actually really hone in on it as an approach in its own right for writing and releasing stuff.
I have heard a little bit of your music. I liked it a lot. It definitely sounded. I did. The one piece I distinctly remember. It kind of it sounded kind of like counterpointed. I heard something contrapuntal in it. I wish I could remember the name of this. But yeah, it was just.
I have a lot of tracks, and I often don't remember the titles to them, in part because they can be kind of long and cumbersome, and because I often come up with them off the cuff because I just release it and I want to put it up, and I think, okay, what's the title? And it's often based, impressionistically on what kind of idea I had going into it or what I'm getting out of it. And, since a lot of the music is instrumental, the titles tend to be kind of long or involved because it's like that's my best way to kind of convey what I have in mind in the music, since I can't really elaborate on it in lyrics, at least so far. But what do you remember? What type of track was it? Live kind of keyboard playing, or did it sound more like a sequenced MIDI one? Because those are basically
the latter. It definitely sounded more sequenced.
Yeah, that was actually how NEFX started, at least musically, and I explored the keyboard side for a while, but recently I've gone back to the sequenced MIDI stuff, mainly through these pieces that are very percussive, where I basically just use drums. That's been my main instrument. So to a degree, I have that mindset. I kind of know how to write for drums because I am a drummer. And they also involve different synth voices for percussion instruments like taiko drums. And although those, especially, in the higher pitch, can have kind of melodic qualities, it's a little vague. And so kind of gives this, in my mind, sort of alien mystical feel to it when you listen back. But, I have also made MIDI pieces that have regular instruments and that are more conventionally melodic. And I have an idea to go back to them. Actually, one thing about that record Zaireeka that interested me is that lately I've been kind of getting into the idea of composing pieces mainly through MIDI that basically focus in on one instrument, and then we'll transpose that same line to either different, shall we say, tones of that same instrument to create full chords without having to manually configure them, or to different instruments entirely so that, everything harmonizes together. So that's kind of what I did with these drum pieces for the most part, where with a few exceptions, the layers that you hear of the basic kit drums, the timpanis, the taiko drums, etc., are all just a direct transposition of a line I wrote for one instrument, just copy pasted to the others to see how it turns out.
Yeah.
And I think I'm doing something similar for something like a bagpipe line or strings or horns, and then transposing that to drums in some way, and still, manually configuring it to a degree so that it's not just one thing following the other, etc. But I think that definitely frees me up to more efficiently explore a lot of the structural or melodic ideas I have in mind that, might otherwise take longer to finish if I'm focusing constantly on making sure that, there are at least 3 lines in a piece and that they commingle together enough.
When you talk about transposing voices and creating chords via transposition, it's interesting because it seems like you could approach it in different ways. One thing that you could do, for instance, say you had a song, say you just took the melody of something really simple like The Little Drummer Boy.
Yeah.
You could transpose that up a fourth, or up, if we're assuming equal temperament, then it would be the 12th root of 2 to the 5th power. That would be 5 semitones. And you could create a parallel that way, and it would be, indeed, harmonically, it would be entirely different. Fourths can be somewhat cumbersome because you can get it's not so conducive to a key anymore. If you take Little Drummer Boy in the key of C, and then you transpose that melody up a fourth, it's and you have the voices at equal amplitude, it would be very easy for somebody not to hear that in C anymore. It doesn't really, it would be, it doesn't quite have the same tonal center. But another thing you could do would be transpose it. I apologize because I should have said this earlier. Because I assume that when you're transposing it, you're transposing the pitch only. You're altering the pitch and you're leaving the rhythm the same, so that everything's parallel. But
right,
what you could also,
like I'm stacking them.
Yeah, but what you could also do is you could resample it so that both the pitch, so that you're really just taking the entire melody of the Little Drummer Boy and you're taking that and you're just compressing it to 75% of its original length, and then layering that on top of the original recording. Now, not only do you have fourths, and not only do you have it no longer in C, but you also have some sort of a polyrhythm that you're creating, because I mean, and the Little Drummer Boy is I picked it as an example because that melody in particular has virtually no syncopation. I think it's entirely half notes and whole notes. Come, they told me, pa rum pum pum pum.
Right.
Everything's on the beat. So yeah, something like that would be it would be you could definitely alter, you could really create a new composition by transposing it, but you have the option to transpose and preserve the duration, or you could choose not to preserve the duration, and either way you would get completely different results.
Right. Yeah, I have toyed with that, and will continue to do so. I actually think I read something to the effect that that's what Bach did to a degree with some of his own compositions, where he would actually, configure a melody in such a way that he could basically come up with, polytonality, polyrhythms, as you said,
yeah,
with that same thing by basically transposing the line key-wise or what have you, but also making it a bit faster or anything like that, or even having it play in reverse over the top of it.
Yeah, the Art of Fugue and A Musical Offering are two of his later works, and they both, and yes, exactly what you're talking about with backwards. He'll because the whole rhetoric of the fugue is that you have a subject, and then you have a counter subject, and then you have an answer, and usually the answer occurs in transposition. So sometimes there are both real answers and tonal answers, and I actually am a little rusty on how much leeway you can allow with a tonal answer. A real answer is very much a very literal transposition. A tonal answer is something that is more, it has the feel of a transposition, but there are certain instances in which Bach, for instance, would, when Bach used the tonal answer, it would be a quasi transposition. It would be like a transposition, but there would be certain notes that he would replace with other notes that were more tonal. Right. And yes, what he would create cannons by he would indeed do stuff like what you're talking about, where he would have a subject, and then the answer would be the literal retrograde of that subject. Or augmentation cannons are another thing, where it's as you're talking about, the answer is the subject, but it's twice as long. All quarter notes all quarter notes become half notes. All half note, so all the quarter notes in the subject would become half notes in the answer, and all the half notes in the subject would become whole notes. That kind of thing. That the very the 2 to 1. The funny thing is that I'm reasonably sure that Ockeghem, the composer Johann Ockeghem, who predates Bach by, I think, a century, would do things that were even more complex than what Bach would do. Or I don't. Yeah, Bach would do augmentation cannons, but I don't think he would ever do anything that was, for instance, I don't think he would ever create chemiolas by having an answer in which all the subject values would be multiplied by 1.5. For instance, I do think Ockeghem did that. I'm almost positive Ockeghem would. He had cannons in which one voice was the augmentation of the other voice, but it wouldn't be a full double. It would be more like 1.5. So all the note values, all their durations in the primary voice. Yeah, the durations of the note values in the primary voice would be multiplied by 1.5 in the secondary voice. So all quarter notes would become dotted quarter notes. All half notes would become dotted half notes. That creates, that can really create some interesting effects. That is not, it's not an easy. I've also heard them called mensuration cannons because mensuration relates to the note values of the measure. Then the 20th century composer Conlon Nancarrow he wrote music on the player piano. He actually he was I believe he was one of the most prominent composers to write almost exclusively for player piano. Many of his compositions would be considered unplayable by humans, or if playable, only playable with incredible difficulty. And he could do stuff like incredibly complex ratios between voices. Cannons that would be instead of a multiplying all the values of one voice by 1.5, he would multiply them by irrational numbers, like the square root of 2 or something, or study number 37 has it actually has it's like 11 different voices, and they're all ratios that you find in the natural overtone series. So 3 to 2, 4 to 3, I think 8 to 5, and so on.
Sounds like very exciting stuff, actually. So there's, you mentioned Ockeghem, and who is this 20th century composer?
Nancarrow, Nanca. RROW. I'll write his name in the chat.
Okay, great. Yeah, I just wrote it down in a document of stuff to look more into.
Yeah, and it's, I kudos to you for being interested in this kind of thing, because it really, I do think it relates to what I was kind of trying to say maybe 20 minutes ago, was that this is the sort of thing that a lot of people are doing now, and it's not exactly, I guess it's kind of like an old, there are people who had tried to plunder before. I mean, plundering is not exclusive to the digital era, or it's not exclusive to the information age, but the information age and the widespread availability of audio editing software can enable people to do things like what Nankero or Akagem or Noi or John Oswald or what people like they were doing. I mean, it's a couple of with several clicks of a mouse, I can take a waveform and stretch it to 150%, and then I can layer that over the original waveform. And that's one way to create a new composition from a pre-existing recording. And it seems like something that you have dabbled with, because I mean, if you're interested in transposing voices and creating chords, not by actually, it's almost kind of like algorithmically creating chords. You're taking a voice and you're transposing it, and then you're getting harmonies that way,
Yeah, I mean, I haven't yet done algorithms. That's part of something that I'm basically studying behind the scenes, but I am interested in doing that. In any case, though, I am very interested in the idea of something that is impossible to replicate. I mean, to start with, NEFX has never really performed live. I mean, there is the live rehearsal / improv side of it that's done in whatever room or rehearsal space and then edited on later. But in a way, I like the melding of the human mind, or that kind of deliberation with the digital, with the forefront, to create something that, even though it's very much an organic idea or set of ideas, it's something that's actually beyond anything that not only has ever come before, but that could ever have come before. Where it feels like you're listening to the frontier right now, whether that's editing something into, that's played, and something that would be impossible to play, or with just sequencing something on MIDI, basically.
Yeah.
Which my interest in that got peaked years ago, actually, funnily enough, from the soundtrack to the game Doom, which I actually used the same sound card as, not even out of a sense of retro, but just because I like the sound of it so much. I just was really interested in the idea that you could create something that sounded so full without anyone being present. And I think part of what interests me about these sorts of things, and with my own project, is that, we have the opportunity to do things without any of the, shall we say, logistical hassle that these great pioneers had to deal with, whether it had to do with finding people who would be able and willing to play the music, whether with them or on their behalf, if indeed they actually got to hear it at all. Since, we take for granted now that we can hear our own stuff as we create it, often in the very process, but there was a time when that was not the default at all. And some people didn't even get to hear the stuff they wrote. Their joy was purely in the composition and their imagination of what it would sound like, or maybe even in some, transcendental ideal of it just being of the music of the spheres, and they didn't have to hear it.
That is a very interesting aspect of, well, it's a nexus of a lot of things. I mean, the music of the spheres was this, I would say it's like this aesthetic desideratum that circulates in a lot of the ancient Greek writings. There was a, I mean, harmony that's actually kind of, when things are rotating. Yeah, in the it was believed that all the spheres orbited each other in ratios that would be harmonic. So yeah, those the legend goes that Pythagoras heard the hammers, and he noted that the ratios, that consonant ratios were simple.
Yeah.
And that consonant ratios were simple ratios, like 2 to 1, 3 to 2, 4 to 3, and dissonant intervals were complex, where they could not be reduced into simpler terms. So yeah, and then that whole thing, actually, like the Greek, the theories of the celestial bodies. Yeah, but it's interesting because that was the because you have music, Musica Universalis and Musica Mundana. Huh. I forgot the fourth one. That's there's that guy Boethius. He's the he's probably the most prominent medieval music theorist, who was essentially reassessing or reaffirming the theories of the music of the spheres that had circulated in ancient Greek writings, including by Plato.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's, I mean, and I mean, I just went off on a tangent, but yeah, I think it's really interesting, everything that you're talking about, especially the part about how there's logistical hassle that is not really being encountered when you have something like when you have MIDI, or when you have any kind of sheet music software, and you can play the music that you're writing as you're creating it. You can listen to it in the process of creation. It is interesting that that is a luxury that may not have been available to earlier generations, especially performing works were difficult.
Right. Yeah. And I try to take advantage of it as much as possible. Even including when, I'm making stuff with other people. Of course, it's a different matter when you're writing stuff together, and there's something to be said for that. I've been in previous bands in which I played drums and the like, but I think there is something to be said for when you can basically meld the organic with the digital to not only create ideas more efficiently, but have more time and means with which to realize other ideas. And that's something that I've been kind of exploring with this project, because it's not just, the detail and depth that you can go with the composition. It's how many of those you can get, especially with limited time, especially if people who are like me who, aren't able to, say, make a living doing music or whatever it is they may do, some sort of creative craft. finding these kinds of combinations of their own ideas with, the best tools they can have. I think it's not only a great way to move things forward, but in a way it's kind of, I would argue it's in a way respectful of, these past visionaries who worked as hard as they did to realize what they did, whether they got to hear it or not, or whether it was something that was played in their time or was more or less buried and been discovered sometime later. I'm just always interested in trying to get as many of these ideas in here out as fast as possible, because I don't like to sit on them for very long. And I think if there's one thing that I would regret about my past time in old bands, is that I didn't think as much to take this kind of approach where, we wouldn't necessarily release songs under that band in the way that I would make out of, our jams that never got turned into songs, but would have been good. And I would think that I should have documented more. I document more now, meaning I save and archive more of it and make sure to back it up so that it might come to use later, because, there's some stuff, even some jams from years ago that are lost to time that I still kind of remember parts of in my head. Maybe I'll basically use my memory of them to create meaty compositions based off of them. But, ideally I would have known back then what I do today to edit these things together to save them in the first place. But I think to a degree, it just took me a while to really embrace that as an approach in its own right, basically, because for a time I was still kind of attached to the idea of, well, it's not really legitimate unless you can actively record and, execute it, play it live, etc. And there's something to be said for that, all that time and passion spent, especially with other people, to, realize something in a full-fledged way. You write, rehearse, record, and tour on it all together. But, there's something to this approach as well. So I try to get the best of all worlds, really.
Yeah. I think I'm a recurring idea that I'm sure comes up in your work, and it definitely comes up in my studies a lot when I think about things like information retrieval and audio recognition software. I mean, the reason why an app like Shazam is operable is because Shazam basically has access to a huge database of digital audio fingerprints, and each fingerprint is a spectral envelope that is essentially a very low resolution version of the song, and it contains it's from what I understand, a spectral envelope is not actually a copy of the song that Shazam can identify. I mean, it's basic database management. There's an index of songs, and then whenever a certain song is being inputted into the query, or yeah, when a user essentially holds their phone up to a radio or a stereo or whatever is playing a song, they are querying that database that Shazam has access to, and there's an index of digital audio fingerprints. So there can be a match between the thing that is being recorded by the user's phone and the digital audio fingerprints that are in the database. The interesting thing that I was going to say, the footnote, is that I don't think that a digital audio fingerprint is a recording of the song per se. I think that, as far as I know, a digital audio fingerprint, by necessity, has to contain little information, or at least it needs to be, it cannot take up huge amounts of storage. So I think that it's a digital audio fingerprint would probably, and I have not completely, I've looked into this a little bit. I think it requires a certain list of zero crossing data, because every time there's a waveform, a waveform is essentially a graphic, a graphic representation, variations in amplitude of time, and that the wave crosses the zero line. So I think that these digital audio fingerprints can be sufficiently created just by analyzing zero crossing data. What I was gonna say is that when I study this and I think about the implications that it has for the identity of a song, the identity of the music of a song, and a recurring theme in our conversation has been that editing is a creative act itself. I definitely think that even some of your, as you mentioned, that and I liked the air quotes that you used, the regret that you have is that you didn't document as much as you could have. Because I think that, and especially if we're talking about, I know that there's an idea that improvisation plus editing can become composition. That you improvise something, you jam with a band, and maybe there's one idea in, maybe you'll have like 20 minutes recorded, and there's one particular thing, say 11 minutes in, one particular idea that can be looped or can be zeroed in on and then analyzed, or it could be edited, or it could be edited, manipulated by technology. You could manipulate it insofar as you could transpose it. And there's definitely it's like, who composed it? We don't really know, because it was kind of a symbiotic process between you and your bandmates and the technology that enabled you to truncate and manipulate it. I mean, it's a fascinating concept, because I think there's something to be said for the creative act. There's you're creating your own source material to build from, and there's a destructive act, but it's not really destructive. It's more just kind of like active immersion in something, and playing with it. You know, I think there's an element of play. You're playing with a recording. And yeah, I think that's, I mean,
sorry, what was that?
I think that's a really interesting, I don't think there's any right way to compose. And so I think that what you're doing, that kind of experimental approach to composition, where you might not even have any preconceived ideas, but you're recording something first and then you're composing later from that source material. I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, part of the beauty of it was that I actually came about that process without any preconceived notions either. You know, you might remember my story that you first talked to me about with how I edited parts of Saint Anger. At first, the bar was so low just because the first issue many people have with that sort of record, past the snare drum, of course, is that, you know, the tracks tend to be overlong and that they tend to repeat certain parts too much. So the initial thing of wanting to see if I could improve it in some way was to just remove parts. At first, that's what it was about. I just thought, well, what if I removed this part, made it a bit shorter? And then it became, what if I put this part and put it over here? And then it just started to spin out of control. But in the process of it, I not only learned about what sorts of things I want in a composition, but it just became more of a productive thing about adding instead of just removing. And that ended up serving me well as time went on. And I think certain techniques I took to in those formative years, I still use today. And I mean, since then, in the bands that I have been in, at least in the past, I would actually edit together jam sessions we had to try to you know, at least write drafts for songs, but with a view towards us eventually playing them, because my bandmates, someone in every band would say something like, oh yeah, that sounds like a good idea. You know, we're having such trouble keeping our focus because, you know, just goofball bands didn't really go anywhere, but yeah, we want to, you know, get some songs going. So yeah, go ahead and record us on your laptop and then edit stuff together later on. So I would do that and I would enjoy it quite a bit, especially being a drummer with no skill in like a melodic writing instrument. You know, that gave me a sense of agency in a way to kind of arrange stuff. So I would do that. And of course, for whatever reason, maybe they didn't feel able or willing to take the time to recall what they were playing in whatever moment I would capture, those songs wouldn't get realized. And actually, funnily enough, to this day, I still remember how some of those compositions go, even though, again, they're lost to time. But that's just something that I eventually just started doing just to make that itself the composition, because I ended up liking what I would do so much and what we would sound like in those moments that I would capture and loop and manipulate, that I just figured it would be better to just keep on doing that. And that's where I've been ever since.
That's that. Well, I mean, that's really inspirational. I mean, that's a very inspirational story. You sound inspired, and that is just so endearing right now. I mean, it's you know, I mean, the creative act. I mean, I think that creativity is self-perpetuating. And I mean, I think that what you're describing, it sounds like you found, I wouldn't say a routine, because you're obviously interested in changing things up and you're interested in exploring new ideas. So I wouldn't say it is a routine in a derogatory sense, but it seems like you, as you describe with your manipulation of Saint Anger, for instance. That's, I mean, it you found a way to play outside your instrument, really. If you're a drummer and you found a way to compose that you keep and it seems like it's self-perpetuating in that the results that you get from what you do, and you're describing a bit of collaboration, because it seems like you get some results and then you show them to your bandmates, and their reaction can sort of inspire new ideas.
Right.
So that's really, I mean, that's
Yeah,
quite beautiful.
I don't even think that I necessarily have more or less inspiration or ideas than anyone else. I just think that for better or for worse, I've just honed in on this kind of approach where it's not really bound to the, shall we say, conventional routine, which again, I'm not putting down and have participated in and enjoyed and appreciated myself, but one of, where you write, rehearse, record, tour according to a certain schedule and set of expectations. And over time, I just sort of brush them off like they're there if I find use in them. And I certainly wouldn't rule out joining a band on the side that does that, because, I've enjoyed that. But certainly for this project and for my own creative ambitions, it just seems like I have to do it this way, because I have too much up in here to take all the time to, try to realize something through that approach, when quite often, it can be a kind of Sisyphean endeavor, where you go so far to try and get something out the door and it doesn't work for this or that reason. And so I think many people in that kind of situation might think, well, these songs can't really get released or something like that. Or if so, then it's less valid or what have you. I think maybe in a way, part of the reason why I approach stuff this way is that I think past video game soundtracks, which were probably my first real musical experience, the next one was punk, which of course is always very lo-fi and was very underground. Prior to that, I didn't even really conceive of music as being like an underground thing that you could pursue in your own right that would be accessible to common people, as opposed to this very select few thing that, you got the impression of through the radio, what have you. And so I've always been interested in that kind of a grassroots, shall we say, cult aspect.
Yeah.
Where I enjoy a lot of mainstream stuff as well. And I'm certainly not balking at the idea of, say, popularity, but I also know that what I do isn't exactly going to get the massive accolades, and that's all right. The point is to realize as many of these ideas as possible in the best way possible.
Yeah, I feel like I can relate somewhat directly, because I made some music that I really don't think is well recorded. I was it's I'm happy that that the ideas exist, that there's a document, that there's an album that I made. The fidelity, I have to live with it, because I don't really think that it would be worth my time to try re-recording it. Also, I also think that had I aimed for fidelity, had that been the aim, had fidelity been the goal, I probably wouldn't have been able to create the music that I wanted to create. Mainly because I'm kind of taking an approach where I'm very much interested in an experimental recording. I'm very much interested in the idea, the ability of the studio environment to create new sounds through manipulation of pre-existing recordings, most of which are my own recordings. But all the same, it's so much fun trying to get two tape machines to play in sync. It's extraordinarily difficult, but it's so much fun. And yeah, there's so much there. You can definitely create some very warped delays, especially if you have two pitch controls, one for one tape machine and once, or at least that was one thing that was fun for me, is I would have one tape machine that I would be recording tracks from a different tape playback onto. I think I had a 2-track and a 4-track, so I would be recording I'd be recording the output of the 2-track onto the 4-track. Say, for instance, I would be recording on tracks 3 and 4, and I would have already had something recorded on tracks 1 and 2, and it would be the same program, but it would be very difficult for tracks 3 and 4 to sync up with tracks 1 and 2 because of the way that the cap stand spins, which that kind of that kind of approach. When taking that kind of approach where it's like I'm trying to create some sort of cannibalistic art, I guess you could say, or that I'm trying to, listen to the sound of something destabilizing or falling out of stability with its counterpart. And yeah, just a lot of the time you can really another way that I think is an interesting way to manipulate sound is by distorting it and also filtering out the low frequencies, because the low frequencies are usually the lowest frequency, with the exception of grave harmonics or difference tones or anything like that. For most of the time, the low frequency is the fundamental. So to cancel out that fundamental and have only the partials, that can really doing that kind of manipulation can alter the signal of the original thing that I had written, like, very dramatically. It can alter it very drastically. And so that was, that was the process that I was interested in. I was very much interested in that process, the creation through manipulation process, which I would have liked for the product to be a little bit more high fidelity. I am not quite sure why it sounds as muffly to my ears as it does, but I will take what I can get.
Yeah, it actually sounds like it'd be very interesting to listen to. Would I be able to hear this stuff?
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat. That's the Bandcamp page.
Excellent. Yeah. Because just hearing you talk about these sorts of things, I'd be very interested to hear what kind of stuff you would make.
Well, I very much, I do very much like punk, and it partly, and I do like it for the grassroots aspect that you aptly point out, but there's also, I think another thing I like about punk is the aggression. There's definitely a lot of grassroots music that is not necessarily aggressive. There can be, the whole gamut of emotions is it's not, I don't think it's exclusive to any genre. I don't even think all punk is aggressive, but I definitely have liked certain, I've definitely listened to certain bands and thought that it was something like, I felt like the musicians were doing something cathartic for them, for themselves.
Right. Yeah, that's one of the things that drew me to it as well.
And do you go by Tombert?
Oh no, that's just a goofy name I made up for that. Sure. My actual name is Kyle.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's I mean, I should be wrapping up this conversation pretty soon because this is 1 a.m. my time.
Right.
And yeah, it's but yeah, I guess we didn't the Bruckner Problem, that composer Anton Bruckner. I think it's really interesting. To me, the thing that's interesting about the problem is that to me it doesn't seem like a problem. The fact that the composer Anton Bruckner wrote 9 symphonies. I think technically he wrote more than that, but his early symphonies he didn't number on purpose. He gave them symphony number 0 and symphony number 00 because I think he thought he was approaching it as, this is a learning experience. I don't want this to be my symphony number 1. So there are 9 symphonies, but the problem is that unlike many composers, Bruckner was very open to suggestions, and he was very much a composer who would make compromises to a symphony in order to get it performed. Which is kind of interesting because I actually, now that you mention it, now that you talk about, or now that I am talking about this, I'm realizing that you did mention the aspect that in earlier centuries, hearing one's works was quite an endeavor, or being able to hear one's works performed was quite an endeavor. So Anton Bruckner, he was not exactly a tyrant. You know, he didn't have tyrannical. He didn't take a tyrannical approach to his composition. He wasn't the sort of prima donna for whom everything had to be his way. On the contrary, many editors would make suggestions, and he would readily take these suggestions so that his works would be that much more likely to get performed. Part of the trickiness of the problem is that some of his editors would make alterations behind his back, essentially. And Anton Bruckner also did make it a point to preserve his sketches. He would preserve his original symphonies as he wrote them, and I think that's an aspect of like probate. I mean, I think he talked to lawyers to make sure that the original sketches and the original symphonies as he wrote them before his editors could get their hands on them would be preserved in some sense. So I think that a lot of so now, fast forward 100 years, and Bruckner is recognized as a highly significant German composer of the late Romantic era. But the problem is that there are 25 valid versions of Bruckner symphonies, because there are published symphonies, and then there are also archived symphonies. And scholars have a field day doing the sort of detective work and trying to determine what edits to Bruckner's scores were things that Bruckner actually wanted versus what were edits that he made under duress versus what edits were things that he had no involvement in whatsoever. What I think is interesting about this is that a lot of scholars seem to frame this problem, as some sort of a witch hunt, basically, and everyone's looking for the definitive version of each Bruckner symphony. Whereas I would see it as, I think it's kind of cool that you can have these different versions, that you can have alternate versions, and I mean, I don't know why they aren't equally valid. I mean, historically, I can understand why some may be less true to Bruckner's vision than others. But I also think that there's something to be said for a multiple realizations of the same work. And especially because when you talk about classical music, every performance is somewhat different. Every conductor is going to interpret it somewhat differently, and every recording is going to be a little bit different. I mean, traditionally, classical music is recorded live on a soundstage with a number of room microphones or overhead microphones. It's not usually, as far as I know, it's very rare in the classical music world that every member of the orchestra plays their part and it's all multi-tracked. That almost, I mean, I'm not saying that never happens, but that's non-traditional. And yeah, I just think I think that aspect of the Bruckner problem is something that I think it showcases one sort of aesthetics, which I think that somebody like me, or for that matter, maybe somebody like you, wouldn't take that approach. I think we might have an approach where it's like, well, there are different versions of the same symphony. There are so many different versions. There are so many different documents, and it's all equally prime. You know, it's like Saint Anger. Like I mean, there are different versions of Saint Anger. There are people who have tried to correct Saint Anger, or there are people who have edited out, you know, entire sections, or who have. I mean, I know that particular album, as some of those YouTube comments mentioned, Saint Anger has been re-recorded. I think there was a link to an album that was the re-recorded Saint Anger where the snare had been fixed. Right, and I just think that's an interesting approach, because I see that as like a different aesthetic. It's almost like you have all these different versions of Saint Anger. And they're not, to me, it's more interesting that just the sheer volume of interpretations.
Right. I think these things are valuable in part for that, in part for, showcasing the different directions that, say, a composition can go, whether it be music specifically or something parallel to that, like, say, writing or constructing. But also in the sense that it can help give people a sense of agency, a sense that they, to a degree, can do this thing too. That it's something that is to a degree accessible to them, and that they don't have to be just spectators. And that would be one thing that I would hope NEFX would be able to encourage people to do, is to feel that they don't have to be spectators. Of course, it's great to be spectators to different pieces. Yeah. We all have to be that to a degree, but to, not feel so much like just they're there and the creator in whatever field is up there, and that it's not attainable at all. You know, when you get to, these different interpretations, or shall we say breakdowns of a material like this, you can end up just going down different rabbit holes of ideas, and before you know it, you might just wind up creating something yourself, and it might be totally beyond the field of what anyone would have thought of, including yourself, before. Whether it be the symphonies or train records.
Right, yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I think you really hit the nail on the head. it was interesting to me that you mentioned that there's, and I think that you are well on your way if one of the, for lack of a better word, if one of the morals of NEFX, or at least something that the philosophy of NEFX might be that, or just one way that NEFX can challenge people's preconceptions. And I would think that we may be living in an era where preconceptions have been discredited. I think that you're right. Agency, that, you know, the listener can have agency. The listener doesn't always have to be a spectator, and I think that's a really beautiful thing. I think you put it very eloquently, and I really support you and your endeavors.
Thank you, Sam. And thank you for this interview too. I mean, NEFX has been around for over 6.5 years, and this is the first time I've been interviewed for it.
Well, I like Todd in the Shadows a lot, and you know, I like the Train Records series that he does, and I love reading the comments. I love reading the discourse, because I used to. I mean, I kind of, it's kind of the first. I don't want to say criticism, but critical engagement. I haven't really, you know, I go off and on. Sometimes I'm very, very much interested in, when I listen to an album, I want to read reviews of it. I want to read what the music press has to say about it. But I don't have any subscriptions to any current magazines. I don't have a subscription to Wire or Downbeat or NME or any currently in print magazines or journals, nor and it's not like, I mean it would be a nice ritual to have, you know, to get a subscription and to read it cover to cover, but that doesn't really accord with my schedule at this exact time. Yeah. That being said, I think it's really, I mean, I'm surprised by how excited I am whenever Todd has a new video, whenever there's a new Train Records episode. It's like, I'm very excited, and I'm excited to read the comments because I'm excited about the discourse, and I think it's great that people, you know, people like to. I don't even think of it as like a Schadenfreude thing. It's not like, oh, here's a terrible record and I'm going to, because I don't think Todd in the Shadows takes that approach. I don't think he's just like hurling insults at a bad record. I think he's more interested in discussing what happened. Why did this record derail the artist's career? Why was it so unpopular? Can it be defended? That kind of thing, which I think is a much more, you know, that's a discourse that I'm very much interested in pursuing.
Yeah, I'm always glad and interested in discourse and ideas. I mean, even just in general, that it's being had, I always see that generally as a good sign. And I think that's one of the reasons why I like him, even though I'm actually not that in touch with pop music. I just like his ideas and the way that he approached them in I think pretty fair way, as you outlined.
All right. Well, Kyle, this has been a very great conversation, and thank you so much for your time. And yeah, I'll stay in touch. You know, I'll definitely check out your music regularly.
Okay, and one more thing before we go, I would actually like to take the time to promote someone else's work, since we mentioned tape manipulation.
Yeah,
there's an artist who I've known more or less. You know, we've definitely supported each other's endeavors. Goes by the name Irons. So if you look for the album Far From Optimal by Irons, you will hear some of the stuff that he does.
Far from optimal.
Yep, by Irons. So Irons.
I will check this out. Yes, that's. I mean, yeah, that's a really. I mean, that's a different conversation. But tape manipulation versus digital manipulation, there's so much you can do with either or.
Right.
So I will check out Far From Optimal.
All right.
All right.
Thank you, Sam.
Have a great night, Kyle.
Yeah, you too.
Bye.
Bye.